everyone, welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm B. I'm a digital illustrator. I like to draw with a dreamy storybook, fairy tale, ethereal kind of vibe. Here on my channel Smudge Toast, I share all about my journey as an artist with videos from vlogs, draw with me's, tutorials, and all kinds of other art related videos. Today I'm very excited to share with you my entire drawing process from start to finish in the style of a tutorial. I will show you step by step how I create my illustrations from the mood board all the way to the finished details. One thing to know about this illustration is that it took me 9 hours to complete. So of course I had to chop it up and speed up the drawing process. I won't be able to show every second of the 9-hour process, but I did my best to show everything that highlights my drawing process. I'm hopeful that in the future I can start a Patreon so that I can show more behind the scenes videos, maybe real-time drawing or at least more in-depth speed drawing processes. But for now, I like to keep my YouTube videos shorter and more concise. So with that being said, let's jump into my drawing process. Before I get into the steps, I want to mention the paper texture I put over all of my illustrations and then the brushes that I use. So for the texture, I just went onto Pinterest and typed in paper texture, and I found the one that I liked, and then I imported it into Procreate, and then I turned the setting to linear light and then turned down the visibility to about 60%. For the brushes, I use mostly brushes from the artist Jing's brush pack. One of my favorite brushes is called Dull Flat Pencil, which I think is really funny because it's such an unflattering name, but I use this pencil all the time. I use it for all of my rough sketches and then even some of my rendering details. Then I use the brush called Pencil and the flat painting stream for most of my rendering. And again, all of these brushes are from the artist Jing's brush pack. I will link it down below if you want to check out the brushes I use. Now on to the first step of the drawing process, which is creating a mood board. For this illustration, I had the idea in mind to draw a field overlooking a little village with my character right in the middle, kind of representing like the essence of the village. So I wanted to draw her skin tone similar to the color of the sky, and I wanted it to be see-through to show some of the village through her skin. So she's not really like a literal person, but she's just like in my mind, she's embodying the feeling of the town as she's watching over her little village. Here is my finished mood board. Now, the reason why a mood board is really important to me in the start of all of my illustrations is that it establishes every element that I want to include in my drawing. So you'll notice that I have references of everything from the poses that I want to use to even the shoes, and I wanted to have her wear like a little bonnet, so that's included too. It's just every element from the main picture, like the village, to little details like the shoes. I want to make sure everything is in there because I want it to just look like a clear picture in my mind. So when you're putting together your mood board, make sure that you add every single element and everything that you think will help your illustration become clear to you. On to the second step of my drawing process. This is drawing my sketch pad. My sketch pad is what I call all of the little doodles and practice warm-ups for my drawing. I include thumbnails, poses, individual elements, just everything that I want to draw. This stage is very important because sometimes I don't know how to draw certain elements, like for example, the type of shoe that I wanted for this illustration was this kind of like chunky Mary Jane style shoe, and I'm not actually very good at drawing shoes, so I wanted to make sure I practiced that specifically so that it translates well into my drawing. And the same goes for the style of sheep I wanted to draw and just things like that. I wanted to make sure I doodled as much as possible to give me a clear idea. This is great for warming up as well because there's no pressure when it comes to this stage. I had an idea that I wanted for an illustration, but I'm not to the point where I'm trying to flesh out all the details and trying to make things make sense yet. That will come in the next few steps. But for this step, the sketch pad, it's just casual and I can kind of just let my imagination go. I can practice whatever I want. It really helps me gear up for my rough draft for my illustration. Speaking of my rough draft, this takes me to step number 3, fleshing out my rough sketch. So when it comes to my rough sketch, I actually usually take a sketch that I already drew on my sketch pad. A lot of the times I draw a lot of poses and then one is the one I end up using. So I just copy and paste it into another layer and then blow it up and go from there. So my focus on the rough draft stage is not to finish anything. It's not to make a clean sketch. My focus for the rough draft phase is now to bring all my elements together and figure out how it really translates into an actual illustration. So things like angles and sizing and proportions are really important in this phase. But details like hands, eyes, the details of the houses, none of that is going to matter quite yet. The most important thing in my drawings with each stage is that every stage I'm on helps me with the next stage. So for example, with this stage, the rough draft, I don't care about the little details. I don't need it to be clean yet, but I do need it to translate well, like I said, with all the sizing and everything, and the angles, the positioning of all of my elements. So when I'm ready for the clean line art stage, I won't have to change any of the angles and the very important perspectives of the drawing, if that makes sense. Another example is in the beginning when I'm doing my mood board. All of those elements will make the sketch pad stage much easier as well. So every single stage sets the next stage up for success, if that makes sense. This process is very mindful, and I used to not draw like this at all. I used to just draw my line art and then color it in and hope for the best. And that may work for some people, but I know for me, I have to be much more calculated about how I draw, and I just find that it really helps my illustrations turn out well. I don't have a lot of illustrations I put to the side and kind of forget about halfway through anymore. This is just such a better process to make the whole thing more foolproof, if that makes sense. So once I get my rough draft done and everything reads well, the perspective makes sense, now I can move on to step number 4, which is choosing my colors. So this step actually comes directly from the artist Carol Mello and how she does her drawing process. I'm very inspired by her when it comes to my own because, again, this method of drawing just makes a lot of sense to me. And I love the way that she chooses her colors before she renders her line art or does anything else. So she has a really messy sketch and then she chooses her colors. So that's what I actually do now. I don't know about you, but for me, I have a very hard time picking out colors, and I'm not very good with color theory. I'm not really good with making colors work together. It's just all guessing, kind of. So by choosing the colors before I render anything or make anything finalized, it feels so much better to me. I can just play around with the colors. I can quote unquote fail as much as I need to until I find the colors that work, and then I can move on. So once again, the way that I do colors now helps me move on to the next stage with confidence. So with this stage, I spent a lot of time picking out my blues and greens. I knew that I wanted this illustration to be very natural with its colors, lots of blues and greens, but I wanted my character to be a little bit more blue and bubbly, if that makes sense. I'll talk a little bit more about her skin tone and the way that I rendered her a little bit later, but yeah, I wanted the colors to be very airy and grassy and pretty. Now that I have my undercoloring / base background colors all figured out, I'm going to move on to the line art. So the line art stage is where I tackle all of those details that I didn't previously. Sometimes I even leave the face of my character blank and just tackle that in the line art phase. Sometimes I kind of do it in the rough draft and then finalize it in the line art phase. Sometimes I even sketch out hands and stuff in the rough draft phase, but again, very rough. For this illustration, I didn't bother with hands or anything like that until my line art phase. So I took as much time as I needed on that. I drew out my hands, her face. I got all of her features fleshed out and finalized. I got her clothes finalized and the sheep, the houses, everything I needed. I think this part took me maybe 30 to 45 minutes to just do the line art. And then when I'm done with that, I change the color from black to a complementary color that I think will work well with the background. So for this illustration, I chose an orange, and then I set it to multiply. Later on, I do color over some of my line art, but my point of my line art is that I can leave some of it if I want to, color over it if I want to. It kind of gives me that freedom to choose. It's clean enough to where I can leave it in places and whatever. I can personalize it how I want to. I like leaving some line art. Of course, it helps me and it's a little bit more simple, but I also like that my drawing comes together as a whole and I don't need to completely paint over or color over my line art. Once my colors make sense and my line art is all done, I move on to step number 6, which is to color in my base colors. This means I am coloring underneath my line art layer, and I'm just choosing base colors to fill in all of my elements, but I'm keeping it very simple. I'm working on making sure that the colors are very clean and readable. So this is not a messy stage. This is basically making sense of the background colors that I already have and cleaning up everything and making everything look orderly and readable. I think I already said readable, but yes, very readable. For the character, I am working with those blues and greens. I'm actually keeping a lot of the underpainting showing through, and I just want her to look pretty transparent, like a bubble. I think I said that earlier. I really had in mind her being kind of bubbly and yeah, transparent for this illustration. One artistic choice that I made was to have some of her clothes be opaque, like her shoes and her bonnet. There really isn't a reason for this. It's just a stylistic choice I thought would look good, and I do really like it. Same with her collar and undershirt, those are opaque, and then the rest of her outfit is transparent like her skin tone. And then for the style of sheep, I really like to keep my animals very simple and almost cartoon-like. I just think it's really cute. When the animal is the main focus of a drawing, I will definitely make them a little bit more realistic and detailed. But when it's an illustration with a lot of elements and the animals are only a small part of it, I want them to look very simple and stylized, just kind of sweet to look at and not very realistic. And then I color in all of my houses with the base colors too. I'm keeping the houses very neutral toned. I'm working with tans, grays, oranges, some rust color reds, just to keep it very cute and village-like. Now that all of my base colors are done, it's time to move on to the biggest step of the whole painting, and that is rendering. The rendering process is where you fill in all the details of your piece. For this illustration, this includes the details like her face, clothes, finishing up the sheep, filling in the highlights and the shadows, drawing all the grass, just everything that will make my drawing come to life. I spent most of my time on this stage. I think I spent maybe 3 hours total before the rendering process, and then when I started rendering to when I finished, it took up the other 6 hours. This varies wildly with my work. Some of my illustrations take closer to 6 hours in total, but because there was so many details, and I gotta be honest, this piece was pretty ambitious to begin with. Yeah, it took me 9 whole hours to do, and most of it was rendering. Once the main rendering is done, my artwork will look a little something like this, and it looks pretty finished, but there are details missing, and that is where the final step comes in my drawing process. That is all of the finishing details. Now, you could include this in your rendering step, but to me, it feels very different because rendering takes a lot of work and focus for me, and then just the finishing up little details like the glow effect that I put on my drawings and all the sparkles and things like that is my favorite part of the drawing. It's very easy for me to do. It doesn't take too long, and it's the stage where I can finally take a deep breath and feel like, okay, I've got this illustration, it's almost done. Now comes the fun part where I can really zhuzh it up and make it pretty. So I give it its own step. For this stage, I usually set my brush to the color setting add, and the first thing I usually do in a lot of my illustrations is to draw a ring all the way around my character, and then taking the Gaussian blur setting and blurring it out, and then turning the opacity down on the glow until it looks right to me. So now she's all glowy. Another finishing detail I wanted to do with this specific character, because she's transparent, is I wanted to make some of her skin and clothes a little bit more glowy than the rest. So the way I did that was I copied and pasted her skin layer on another. I copied and pasted her skin tone on another layer and then set it to overlay and then turned that down a little bit. It just kind of brightened everything up. It didn't necessarily make it glowy, but I like the way that it just makes some parts bright and some parts a little bit more subdued, and it gives a good contrast. And then another thing that I was thinking of for my character was to give her clouds just around her specifically. So I did that. I just did a normal color layer of white in the shape of clouds, and then I turned the opacity down, and then I did another layer of white line art to kind of border in the clouds and make them look a little bit neater. Finally, I added lots of sparkles, and there you have it, my finished illustration. Let me know what you think about it. I really love this illustration. I am so happy with the way it turned out because I had this idea in my head, and it's just so satisfying when an idea works out on paper. I was so happy with it, I even printed it out and put it on my wall right away. So yeah, this was a very successful illustration. That is it for this video. If you've made it all the way to the end, make sure to drop a sheep emoji down in the comments and let me know if there's any other ideas for videos you would like to see. If you haven't already, please like and subscribe so that you can watch this small channel grow. I really appreciate all of the support. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!